Welcome everyone to the 14th and final webinar in Craftsbury's summer 2020 COVID series. It has been a blast to do the first 13. I'm sure this one will be no different. Today has no topic. It's just going to be coaches telling Craftsbury stories. And I guess when I got to Craftsbury in 2005, I felt like I was a reasonably knowledgeable, reasonably capable coach. And then I heard Kevin and Rick and Sarah Gronwald and Noel give doc talks my first week. And I remember thinking, holy cow, I got to raise my game. And so, you know, for me, for the last 15 years, Craftsbury has been, I think, the best professional development opportunity in North America. I don't think, and I can say this without immodesty because I'm really talking about my colleagues. I don't think anybody in North America has heard more outstanding coaching in the last 15 years than I have, because I've been in attendance at almost all of Craftsbury's camps throughout that time and gotten to listen to a lot of really good coaches. And so that, I said there was no topic today, but that really is the topic. The title is The Best Thing I Learned at Craftsbury. And maybe the best thing I learned at Craftsbury has been that I got to keep raising my game. So we're gonna get started. And again, please keep yourselves muted throughout. There are a lot of people in this meeting, and there's bound to be some background noise in at least one or two of the households involved. And let's just go ahead and begin. And I thought we'd start today with Kevin MacDermott, our associate director, because I can see him on the screen in front of me. And Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Troy. Yeah, this web series has been fantastic. I've been fortunate enough to participate in a couple already. Really excited to participate today. And to Erika and Troy, you've done really extraordinary work to bring these to everybody and have a lot of coaches involved. I have a ton of our former attendees involved. So really kudos to you, Erika and Troy, for doing this. So when Troy offered this topic and kind of put it out to people on the head coaches and the coaches list of who might like to speak, I was really eager to do so because I echo Troy's sentiment that I've learned more at Craftsbury than I have in any other professional development environment that I've been in now near to 20 years of coaching. So when I thought and kind of reflected on it a little bit, the best thing I've learned at Craftsbury, there are 100 best things that I've learned at Craftsbury. The coaches on this panel who are here, I have learned a tremendous amount from literally every single person who is on this panel, including Marlene Royle, who hired me for my very first weekend of work at Craftsbury. So that's the best thing I learned, is that Marlene hired me, and I've been joyful to coach there ever since. But literally every single coach has influenced me in my thinking of the sport. But I'd actually like to talk about Pat Guelakis, who was on this call, but had a little bit of a professional responsibility at Choate, where he is the head boys coach. He also teaches advanced placement physics at Choate. And I want to talk about Pat because he studied in college at Trinity electrical engineering. He then went on and got his master's degree in electrical engineering and computer science at WPI, Elite Technological Institute. I studied theater. Pat, in his free time one summer at Craftsbury, decided to try to teach me calculus, and I normally do creative writing and read poetry. My friendship with Pat I cherish. He's a close friend, an incredible colleague, and really, I respect him tremendously. But I have learned so much from coaching with him at Craftsbury because our minds are like constructed differently. We've approached the sport from different positions. We've approached coaching from different vantage points, and really almost like diametrically opposed framing devices for how we engage with the sport. And it has been extraordinarily enriching to coach with him and to be able to hear him talk about rowing, to be able to talk to him about sculling, and to just have this viewpoint and this perspective that is so counter to my own natural viewpoint in the way that I engage with sculling and the world. I've just learned an enormous amount from Pat, and it's so positively influenced my approach to the sport, because it forces me to be more curious, to explore the sport from different approaches that might not be my natural inclination. And Pat has like always challenged me. He will give a doc talk that has a framing to it that I would never even think of, that I would never even conceive to present the sport in that way. And it's, I use Pat as a singular example of someone who I've coached with probably since 2005 or 2006. But it doesn't just apply to him. It applies to every single coach on this call who I've been lucky enough to coach with. So, yeah, I don't know if that's the type of anecdote you were looking for, Troy, but that was what struck me most profoundly when I reflected on it, about why I love coming to Craftsbury.
It's all good, Kevin. Thanks very much. Let's go to Tim Whitney. Tim, unmute yourself.
Okay, check one, testing. All right, I'm off and zooming. Welcome everybody. I'm Timothy Whitney down in Brattleboro, and I learned pretty much most of everything I learned about sculling at Craftsbury. Obviously, there's a lot of refinement, but 23 years ago, when I was 21, I went up, and Marlene Royle and Ricci were two of my coaches. And I remember Peppa. I remember being very scared of Peppa. I just wanted to get my boat assigned and be left alone by Peppa. I remember Rick backing out of the fog for a first dock talk. And I was a sweep rower, so I sort of knew kind of what was going on. But sculling, I knew was something else, and I really wanted to soak it in. And I remember doing that. I remember paying attention, and I guess one of the most important things I've learned is getting in the boat correctly and elegantly, and to make it feel good, and to be smooth, and to be that moment of leaving earth, leaving land, leaving the dock, leaving all the other problems associated with gravel and shoes and Peppa, and doing it well. And I remember learning how to do it. Thank you, Rick. Butting the grips together. I teach people that to this day. I don't know if anybody ever listens to me, but I try. And I learned how to get out and in, and it was awesome. And I will say that one of the things that allowed me to do that, I think, is Craftsbury. I remember the dock, and everybody knows the dock. It's the perfect sculling dock on earth. It really is. It's low to the water. It's wide. It's just perfect. And it just makes getting in make sense. And it's an easy place to learn, and it's a great place to learn. And then the lake itself, I think the other thing I mentioned in my email to Troy, the basics, getting in, getting out, was turning and learning how to back and turn. And I think the lake itself really lends itself to that. It's so, on those mornings, is so beautifully calm and buoyant, and it's not going anywhere, and there's no refrigerators floating by. And I think that's a really special way to learn how to scull. So I really thank everybody. I thank Craftsbury, and I thank the lake, and I'm excited to get back at it. 2021, baby. Woo! All right, I'm muting myself. Later.
Thanks, Tim. I think we're starting high energy here, so we'll go to Helen next. Helen, it's all you.
All right, thank you for that, Troy. So this year marks the 10th year since I started at Craftsbury as a intern in college, and I interned for 2 summers. So I am constantly reminded when I get to see Craftsbury coaches who have been who have been my coaches and mentors for 10 years that they knew me when, and I hope that they never meet any of my current athletes and divulge any of the stories that they have of me when I first started all of this. Yeah, when Troy sent out the message saying, what are the biggest lessons that we've learned at Craftsbury, similar to what all the coaches have said up to this point, it's a long list for me. It's a very long list, but I think the biggest ones have been, I really learned the value of taking the time to slow things down. I started as an intern when I was a collegiate rower, and I was very wrapped up in the competitive D1 world of everything has to go fast all the time. But learning how to value slowing things down so that you can speed things up the right way has been a major tenet of what I've taken into my coaching. And especially in current times, I just started a new position as the head coach of a youth program with a lot of kids that want to go fast all the time, which is great. But right now we don't have anything to go fast for. So getting them to buy into how to slow down and do it correctly is an endearing challenge, and one that I would not be well suited for if I hadn't spent all these summers hearing about it from people that show that it works time and again. And the other big thing that came to mind is, I mean, Craftsbury is really where I've learned how to coach, and not just the nuts and bolts of giving feedback on how to make a boat move better, but how to be a coach on a team of coaches, and what that means to support each other and work with each other and learn from each other in order to make the experience on the water the best that it can be. And I feel super fortunate for that. And it's something that, you know, I'm now in a position where I hopefully get to be the one that leads that happening for other new coaches. And we need to be back at Craftsbury next year because I'm running out of tricks, and I need a yearly dose of learning more things from these guys so that I can keep doing my job back home. Favorite stories, there's a really long list of ones that on reflection I realized were all wildly embarrassing to me, including how I broke my finger once when I was an intern, and Troy's offer to reset it with some pliers on site with Peppa. And I don't know if I've ever tried to run so quickly as I did in that moment. But I think one of my most cherished memories was when I was interning. The first year I was interning, I actually was there in September and missed the first 3 days of my university term and had to complete an erg test on my own in a different time zone than the rest of my team and submit results. And one of the coaches sat down and did it with me, and it was the best test I'd ever had. And it was something that coach didn't have to do, but they mentored me through it. And it really stuck with me as like, here's what it means to just go the extra mile for your athletes and be committed to helping them get better in whatever way you're able to. The fact that it was the last erg test I was physically able to pull in college, I try not to dwell on, and just say that it ended with a high, and it's an example that I've tried to follow now that I'm no longer the one testing. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Helen. As she mentioned, Helen started out at Craftsbury as an intern, and I had the bright idea back in, about 2008 or 9 or something like that, of getting students from the Pac-10 to intern because they don't start until later in September. And I remember calling Helen's references, and I got Bob Ernst on the phone, and his comment was, "Helen, oh, she's terrific." So Helen can hint that there are sordid stories to be told about her tenure at Craftsbury. I don't know any. We're going to have Pat Guelakis next, already made famous by Kevin in his introduction. Pat, it's all you.
Thank you, Kevin, for that. Great introduction. In my mind, two of the moments I think that Craftsbury really shifted the trajectory of my sculling and allowed me to break through, some parts of my own sculling and through advice of other coaches. And I remember one particular instance, I'd worked with Rick for 2 years as, in sort of his tutelage at Conn College, and came on the Craftsbury through that vehicle. And, you know, my first couple years at Craftsbury, I was a dodgy scholar at best, just trying to figure it out, but had all the arrogance in the world to think that I knew what I was doing. Rick at one point had you know, started to explore putting tubes on the sterns of boats that would intake water, then water would come out of the top of the tube, and it would be sort of a real-time feedback on how fast the boat is going. And basically what it tells you is how much check the boat has and the variability of the speed of the shell throughout the stroke. And you can see at the catch, usually the water drops down precipitously because we're all hammering the catch and slowing the boat down and doing all the things that Rick, you know, up to that point I didn't listen to, but was trying to make us all aware of. So he asked me if I could put one on my boat so he can watch me scull with it. Little did I know he was playing the long game and actually wanted me to put it on my boat and then row in front of one of his dock talks to use me as a model of how bad rowing can be when you're hammering the catch. So he's like, now watch this. When Pat comes by, look at how much his water drops, and just, you know, put me on. Anyway, so long story short, I got really frustrated and I was sort of challenged by that moment and decided I was going to figure this out. So I went out, I remember one day, went up past the Narrows when there was no one out in the lake. And I was rowing with the water coming down. And I was like, you know, rowing more and more frustrated, seeing the water keep dropping more and more. And at one point I said, you know what, I'm going to figure this out. And I'm going to try to do what people talk about, releasing the oars, giving up control of the system. And if I go in, I don't care because there's no one out here. I went out there and I was like, when no one was going to see me flip. So I was like, I don't care if I flip, I'm just going to go for it. Went to the catch and just started letting go of the handles. Like I just was at that moment of frustration. And in that actually learned how to put the blades in the water well. And it was this moment of just, I'm just going to give control to the system entirely. I'm going to stop trying so hard. And if the whole thing explodes, I'm willing to go to that level. And I think that to that point, I wasn't willing to give up what I thought was true sculling. And at that moment, I was like, I'm blowing this up. And so I guess what I learned in that moment is that if you don't seek out something drastically different, you're never going to make the change. And you have to be willing to play with it and go outside what your feelings of sculling is to find those moments. I think we get stuck in our technical ruts and think we're making the change, but we're just doing more of the same. And the second, shorter story is that a couple of years later, I had the privilege of working with Michelle Africa 1 week, and she's just phenomenal and super playful in boats. And one of her favorite drills to do is to row like a novice. Grip the oars, put your thumbs underneath it, dig the blades in deep, row really hard, and it sort of brings you back to what it feels like to row. At that, it brings you back to what it feels like for people just starting out to row, and it gives you an appreciation for how scary it is and how frightening it can be. But she also in that, sort of brings this and if you flip, you flip. And when you get to that level, again, you're willing to make those sacrifices, if you will, of ego to try things out and experiment with it. I think we're afraid to experiment because we're afraid to lose a little bit of our egos. And so, if anything that I learned is just have fun in the boat and try something new. To go to Kevin, when something that Kevin says, explore your space, really try to see what the limits of the movement is and realize that there's a lot of different things that you can try. And a lot of us are really unwilling to make changes because we're afraid of doing it wrong, but often that's how you learn how to do it right. That's my favorite sort of two stories out of Michelle Africa and learning how to catch.
All right, thanks, Pat. How about Marlene? What do you got for us today, Marlene?
I thought I was going to talk about certain things, but now I have no idea. Actually, Craftsbury is such a huge part of my life since 1982 that I find that it's pretty difficult to try to summarize all of these things. And obviously, tons and tons of people and stories that have been just precious. But I think I would say, looking at a lot of the coaches who are here, who I've been privileged to know for 15 or 20 or 25 years. I think I met Rick in 1982. The first time I wandered up to Craftsbury, and it was September 6th in a full moon. And I thought, after I saw the lake, that whatever I have to do, I'm tired of going back down that hill and leaving and going back to Boston. I'm coming to Vermont. And it took a few years, but finally I did make that move in 86. Unlike many other coaches, I did not come from a scholastic coaching background. In my background in coaching, started in a master's recreational program on the Charles River, and then at Craftsbury. So for me, it's really interesting to listen to coaches who come from scholastic backgrounds and to get different points of views on how to do things. I was very much focused on single sculling and working in the camps at Craftsbury. So I was always learning from different people. And we have so many international level coaches who come. We have so many coaches who come from different walks of the scholastic life, and everybody's got something to offer. And certainly what I learned as a coach is no matter what level another coach is at, there's always something that you can learn. They've always got a different way of looking at something. So always keeping your ears open, always looking for another approach. Because I see one of our jobs or roles at camp is to look for that one element that's going to make that scholar that weekend as good as we can get them by the end of the weekend. So it's a little bit like working the front lines. You know, we want to find that one thing that's maybe going to be the light bulb or the aha moment, and what's going to make that camp really good for this scholar so that they get out of it what they wanted to get out of it. So learning from other coaches is paramount. And as more time goes on, I feel like I know less and less rather than more and more, that there's so much to learn. And I've just the last 2 seasons learned a ton from Troy, working with Troy again the past couple of years, and Carol and Rick certainly from many years. And I'm still making changes in my own sculling. And I think as a sculling coach, you have to also get out in the boat and work on things. And Kevin's webinar was very much about that at the beginning of the season. And you know, that's one of the main things I learned is you have to try to listen to other coaches, go in the boat yourself, try to put it into practice. When you're coaching people, ask them to describe what they're working on and see if can they describe to you what they're working on. Because if they don't have that mental image, then we have to help them connect the dots so that they can put their blade in the water correctly. You can't do it if you don't know what you want to do. But so it's just an enormous learning curve, I think. And my 2 very short stories is the first time that I ever fell out of a single was at the Craftsbury dock in front of about 45 people, when I was demonstrating sitting up at the top of the slide and letting go of one handle, and somebody had put my oars in for me and didn't tighten it very well. So I did a big roll in full sweats in the first week of October in front of one camp. And probably my other favorite story was doing groups up at the Narrows. And we were doing a drill and stopped for a second, and a black bear ran down from one side of what is now the Stevenson property, the new property, ran down from one side, jumped into the water, swam through the Narrows, right through the middle of our group, and then ran back up probably to Carol's house. So.
All right, great. Thanks, Marlene. How about Ellen? Ellen, want to be next?
My introduction to sculling was because I had an office job at Craftsbury, and the management at the time wanted us to be able to talk to the summer guests in a more intelligent fashion than when somebody said, should I bring my sculls? We didn't just freak out because we didn't know what sculls were. So that led me into sculling. When I came to California, my first job was being a dock master on the weekends. And those are the sorts of jobs, office jobs and dock master, that teenagers might have. But I was about 50 years old when I started out in that world. Now I coach pretty much in a vacuum, and it's pretty mysterious sometimes to try to figure out what to do next. So all the years of association with Craftsbury gives me some things to call upon. And like the other coaches have said, it needs to be refreshed. And the collaborative way that Craftsbury encourages the coaches to behave and interact is really a lifesaver back out in the world of single sculling. I coach on the San Francisco Bay. Our novice program has 1 to 3 people in it. We hold on to their boats at the dock for a very long time. The first 2 hours, we don't let them out of our sight. It's a very controlled situation, partly because of the venue that we have with lots of tides and currents, and you don't want people to disappear on you. So when I started coaching at Craftsbury, I was pretty shocked at the way people were just put in boats and sent out, and it made me a little nervous. And I helped Larry Guelakis with a Learn to Row day one weekend in June, and there were 25 people who showed up who'd never been in boats before. And Larry just said, just put them in boats and shove them off. And I said, but, he said, just do it. They'll be fine. And lo and behold, everybody was fine. And the only person who had any trouble at all was a gentleman who'd rowed successfully as a child and hadn't been back in a boat. And he knew everything, he said, but he could do nothing. And everybody else managed to stay upright and have a wonderful time. So that really loosened me up and let me see that we need to, as coaches, trust our athletes that they'll figure something out, and then we can guide them and help them figure it out with a little more finesse, and whatever a person's goal is, help them get there. When I show up, I have notions, and some of my notions are validated by the other coaches. Some of my notions are challenged and debunked, and some of my notions become refined with new language, the way Kevin talked about his interaction with Pat. And some things I've never even thought of. And so my brain starts to work. When I was learning I first did a weekend in June, and then the summer was very busy and there were lots of responsibilities. In the fall, there were fewer guests. The season went into October then, and it was cold and nobody wanted to come. One week I was invited to participate in the session because a woman came who was blind and needed somebody to sit in the bow of the double and stabilize it while she was coached. So I sat there in the double, managed to flip it. She let go of her oars, and my motherly instincts reached out to hold on to her. The boat flipped over. But we solved that problem. The other week when I was invited to participate, there were 2 guests and 2 coaches. And so I was supposed to be some kind of social buffer. And I think I was just put in there to be a laughing stock because these 2 guys were very athletic, 40-something-year-old guys who knew all about everything. And they started talking about lats. And I said, "What's a lat?" And that caused all sorts of hilarity. And one of the coaches said, "Oh, Ellen, you don't have to worry about that. Just row." So again, I was put into these situations. Why? Because for some reason, people had confidence that I would rise to the occasion, whatever the occasion turned out to be. And so that's a way that the coaches interact with each other. And it's a way that at least for me, I try to approach the athletes who are coming to the camp. What do they know already? What do they want to know? How can we help them? When should we just leave them be? And another dimension that sometimes comes into play, and this is a sort of jokey way that it presents itself. But one of the coaches in that first fall and I used to talk a lot, and we decided we needed to start Pete and Ellen's rowing school, mind repair and soul alignment. And so that brings up the way that rowing fits into all our lives much more than simply being in a boat and learning technical skill. Jimmy Joy talks about this too, the holistic integral coaching, where you look at the whole athlete, your whole self, and try to not only make sculling better, but make the world better. And I think that's what sculling has helped me with. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Ellen. Ellen has teed me up for a hat trick of appreciation involving she and Kevin MacDermott and Larry Guelakis. I was thinking earlier about the party game 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. And for those of you not familiar with it, just about everybody in Hollywood can create some sort of a straight or convoluted line between their career and Kevin Bacon's. And I think everybody who coaches at Craftsbury can, we have 6 Degrees of Larry Guelakis. Everybody who coaches at Craftsbury can draw some kind of a line, whether straight or convoluted, to Larry. And something that has always impressed me about the way Larry coaches is he has a seemingly limitless bag of pithy sayings that are anywhere from 2 to 5 words long that become mnemonic devices for you because they're unforgettable. And maybe the most memorable for me is he's fond of saying, "Our only limitation is lack of imagination." And when I got to Craftsbury, I think I probably knew 2 stationary drills. I knew tapping drills, and I knew the placement drill where you sit at the release and release your blades and go to the catch and just do a recovery and a catch. And looking back, I think of what Larry said, lack of imagination. I did 2 stationary drills because those were the only 2 stationary drills I knew. And anybody who's heard me give the first day doc talk has heard me credit Kevin with sitting in his single one day during his own doc talk and sort of gesturing broadly around himself and saying, "You got to own this space." And that got me wondering, all right, how do you go about owning the space? How do you get better at owning the space? And I started hitting on more stationary drills. And so the connection to Ellen is that Ellen taught me one of what has become possibly my favorite stationary drill of rowing in place. A lot of coaches call it the push-pull drill. So in any event, without Larry and Kevin and Ellen and a host of others, the whole comfort in the boat session that we do at our week-long camps just simply probably wouldn't exist as it does. So thanks, guys. And that brief interlude will be followed by Associate Director Carol Bauer, if she's ready, and unmute yourself and tell us something, Carol.
All right. Well, I am going to include that station or the work with comfort in the boat, but I want to, first of all, Kevin, Marlene Royle was the person who hired me as well way back when. So Marlene, that's 2 of us that you brought into Craftsbury. And I also coincidentally want to refer Pat Guelakis as offering me a piece of advice that was just a real aha moment for me. And as a sweep rower, I was really having a hard time relaxing the chest and being able to open up and get good length while sculling. And Pat and I happened to be, in the same part of the lake at the same time. And I went up to Pat and I said, "Pat, I'm really envious as how spread apart you can get your hands at the catch." And he said, "Well, what you can do is just imagine, just as you come up into the catch, try to follow out of your peripheral vision, follow the oarlocks as they pass you." And I made it for a moment there, I at least thought of the actress Anne Bancroft, because she could actually spread her eyeballs apart and bring them back together and then move them side to side independently of each other. Then once I got past that notion, I started working on that. And what that did for me was it took the notion that I had to use my body and my hands to get spread apart. I got that out of my brain, and I used the oar locks, moving the oar handles, and I just let my hands follow the oar handle. So it was that change of going from my body trying to make the oars do something to just letting the oars guide my body and get that nice spread. And the interesting thing was I got maybe a little bit more spread, but that felt good. But then after repeating it over and over again, for a number of strokes and a number of days and a number of weeks, all of a sudden I had a lot more spread and I felt a lot more comfortable at the catch and certainly a lot more open. So it was just that one little thing that really seemed to open up. And it was a big part of it was just letting your body follow the system rather than trying to make the system fit into what your body's doing. And so that was a big change for me. And I really try to approach coaching in that sense, is talking more from the system as opposed to from what your body is doing. The system of the boat, that is. And then the comfort in the boat thing, we spend a lot of time tipping side to side, seeing how far we can make the boat tip over. We even have one coach who actually flips the boat underneath him. I never went quite that far. But the other day I was out rowing and we had just had a storm and a flood. And I didn't realize that as I was heading down in my normal traffic pattern, I didn't see right behind me that there was this snag, this log that had lodged itself in the river. And I ended up rowing up and over in such a way that I got this 6-inch log lodged inside my rigger. So it was sticking up in there. It was up about 12 inches from the surface of the water. And I was stuck with this log sticking out from in between the triangle of my rigger, the front brace and the part that sticks straight out. And my first thought was, is there anybody around here that can help me? Because I was out there by myself. And my second thought was, well, I'm glad there isn't, because I wouldn't want anybody to see what I just did. But my next thought was, okay, I've done comfort in the boat. I know how far I can tip the boat. I'm going to give this a try and see if I can get myself out of this. I think if I'd not done the comfort in boat work and not had that awareness of sort of owning that space, I probably would have just dove out of the boat, try to get the boat out and then try to climb back in the boat again. But what I was able to do was just sit in a certain way, tip the boat over just far enough, almost standing up and tipping the boat until I could get the rigger up and over that log and free myself. And so that type of drill, that type of situation, first of all, it makes you a better rower, gives you a better feel for the boat, but it also helps you get out of trouble if you happen to get into an awkward place with your boat. So I felt pretty good about that. And I'm really grateful that we've done all that work with comfort in the boat. And you can never get comfortable enough in the boat. I always look forward to that day of the week that we take people out and go through that, because every time we do it, I always feel like I just get just that little bit more comfortable in the boat and a little more feeling of, yeah, I can handle this space and I can work with this system. So.
All right, thanks, Carol. We had a late edition and got an email from Ed day before yesterday, and I think Ed would be good for this moment right now.
Thank you, Troy. So there were two things that popped in my head when I got Troy's email. The first, to continue on the Larry Gluckman 6 Degrees of Separation, seeing that so many of us have overlapping stories from him, is when I was assisting him in 2007 at Trinity. It was my first time coaching a collegiate team, and was ready to impart everything that I knew. And so just had motor mouth. And he told me, you got to know when not to say something. And at the time, I thought that was more for the athlete. We do a bit of coaching and then let the athlete sort it out, absorb it, try it. What I started to discover at my time at Craftsbury, and that fall 2007 was my first year coaching up at Craftsbury, was that the other side of the sword was just as beneficial to me as a coach by knowing when not to say something led me to observe even more. And then just, I don't know, 2 days ago, I was listening to an interview with Chris Rock, the comedian, who has been learning how to swim as an adult. And what kind of clicked everything together for me was him saying, let go, everybody floats. And just as simple as that is, it pieced my whole, the past, I don't know, 13, this would have been my 14th year at Craftsbury. Every time that we have the opportunity, and so many people have already mentioned this throughout the call, talking about listening to a doc talk that has challenged you, what the lake can provide, slowing things down. Ellen, you said it so nicely about that one camper who learned sculling as a kid. He knew everything, but he could do nothing. We're so limited by our preconceived notions that, and Craftsbury is such an incredible place to experiment and play. And some of my favorite memories are, messing around with Troy and Comfort in the Boat sessions and just creating new things that we can do that have nothing to do with sculling. And because they have nothing to do with sculling, but they're connected to the water and they're connected to the system of the boat, they have everything to do with sculling. But that idea of just letting go of everything that we thought we knew, whether, you're the triathlete that has never tried sculling before, but you're super capable and you go out there and you try to muscle it, whether you're the person that's been sculling for 50 years and you've heard 100 doc talks at Craftsbury. There's so much that just by truly letting go and opening your eyes and observing, whether that's having the incredible opportunity to just observe the beauty of the place, if it's, that feel of letting go the handle like Pat was talking about and having the oar and that sound that it makes as it drops into the water and having that click in your head as the proper way to catch. If it's that doc talk, if it's a conversation, one of my favorite things is listening to two campers who are in two separate small groups come back to the same table over the next meal and talk about, what did you learn? What did you learn? And hear themselves and me get to hear them say it in their own words and translate it. I've learned more from listening to newbies up at Craftsbury talk about the sport in their own vocabulary that is so removed from the sport that it brings the brilliance of a child's eyes to it. And so that's been the most useful thing that I've learned, and especially in this time where unfortunately I have not been able to connect with rowing or sculling since back in March, and just have been able to think about it a lot and let my mind flow with it a lot and read new things and listen to these incredible talks that Craftsbury and Troy and Erika have put on, and the coaches. It's been great to step back and just let go and absorb and observe and learn. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ed. Let's go to one of our uber long timers. Dan Roock has coached at Craftsbury since way back in the Steve Wagner days and was the Green Racing Project's first full-time coach. And he's here with us this afternoon. Dan, if you're unmuted, it's your floor.
Thank you. I think I just unmuted myself. Yeah, the problem with this chat is just so much to talk about, and I know I'm supposed to give a story. I think a story is going to be really hard to give, but the mid '80s is when I started coming up to Craftsbury, and when Troy asked, to come up, what did you learn about Craftsbury? Tell us some stories about Craftsbury. I mean, there's tons of things popped in my head, so I'm just going to share a number of those, and some of them make sense, some of them don't in any kind of flow here. But the biggest deal, what I learned there is just how great a place Craftsbury is for coaching development, as everyone's sort of hit on. But I've also learned just a ton about people. And the one thing that is driven home every week I was there is that you can't judge people, or the only judge of people can't be how well they row. And that there's at every dinner, every meal you'd have, you'd just be sitting down with these campers. And in my mind, I would think, oh yeah, that's the guy with the really bad catch, or that's the woman who, just can't seem to, go straight. And then you realize, well, that person's also the dean of engineering at MIT, or this person was one year was a Roman Catholic priest, or this person was this really fantastic school teacher, or this one person was a general in NATO. I mean, it's just been stunning to figure out what these people do, and it broadened my mind a little bit to know that, well, you can be accomplished and still not have a very good catch. There are other things in life that give people value and worth. So I'd learned that. And over this time too, I've been reflecting on how much Craftsbury is so special, because it's people, when they're here, they're usually having a good time, and they enjoy the food. I'm just remembering things that sort of bolster that. Like, again, the food's always been amazing. I was always worried that when the kitchen loses a certain cook, they're gonna lose some quality to the food. And it only happened once, and this was a good thing. There was a woman who worked in the kitchen once who late in the summer would bring every zucchini she could find in the county, and we would have zucchini and bread, which is common. We'd have zucchini in the chocolate chip cookies, which was awful. We'd have zucchini in the meatloaf. We'd have zucchini in the salad. We'd have zucchini pudding, enough with the zucchini. So that woman was, when she moved on, that everyone was happy, but the food's been amazing. Other things just have stayed the same, like the flip experience. But I don't, it's been more of an experience for others than some. Like, there's a guy who flipped, and his flip test got back in the boat just fine, but realized his dentures hadn't come back with him. And they had I don't even know if they found them back in the water, but they had to swim back to try to find the dentures. The community that develops in just a week's time here is pretty amazing. And being out in the wilds of Vermont really seems to bring out sort of a calm in people and a real joy of being around each other. I remember there's one night when there was sort of a buzz in the camp, and everyone got pretty excited because there was northern lights in the sky, the aurora borealis. So as many people that were awake still at the time, sort of going outside and into the high spot in the back field, and we're trying to look to the north and looking at the sky, which was kind of glowing a bit. It was really exciting. And I was kind of thinking, yeah, it's kind of orangey. It's a little bit too much orange. I don't think aurora borealis is supposed to be orange. And it was a barn that was about 5 miles away that was burning. Whatever, that was classic Vermont stuff. I'm going to get to some rowing in just a moment. The other instance that just popped into my head has to do with the campers, and again, and just the talents that they bring. And this was when Steve Wagner was the director, and Steve had a great sense of humor, and he was addressing the group before a practice, and he was going over the other things you can do around Craftsbury, like all these things, have a little time off in the afternoon or in the evening, you should do this or try that. And he was mentioning how he just the night before attended a Hardwick chamber players concert, which these classical musicians, and about how entertaining it was, until this lady sang at the end. He said, man, that was the time if she wasn't singing so loudly, it'd be a good time. We could all take a nap, just joking about this woman who was singing as an opera aria as part of this show down in Hardwick. And it turns out, unbeknownst to Steve, that she was in the sculling class that week and heard that story. So there was a lot of backpedaling and massaging that was required after that. But at any rate, tons and tons of stories. But the story, the thing that I remember the most that popped into my head has to do with coaching and coaching development, and about how amazing it is as people reflected, especially as a young coach, to go up and listen to doc talks and listen to some veteran coaches give what they feel is rowing. And one week when I was there as a new coach, the guest coach was Alan Rosenberg. And Alan Rosenberg was a coxswain, and then he coached at Vesper and other places. But he is turned into being one of the very best coaches on the planet. He coached the 1964 Vesper 8 that won the Olympic gold medal. He won a world championship medal coaching the U.S. men's 8 in 1974. And if there's ever sort of a guru of coaching, it was Alan Rosenberg. And there is actually the Rosenberg technique, which is what people talk about still to this day. And so here I was, this is, if there's a Yoda in coaching, it's Alan Rosenberg. He's also, as a coxswain, was pretty small in size. So that description sort of fit. And one thing he would do, it's sort of a teaching trick, is he wouldn't speak very loudly. He would always be kind of very soft spoken, which meant if you were there around, you had to really lean close in and really pay attention to hear what he was saying. So you really paid attention. And so it was an interesting little trick. I'm told it's not just his trick. I found out later that a lot of people do that, but I learned it from Alan. But the big deal is I thought, okay, I'm going to really learn a ton this week, listen to all his doc talks. I'm so anxious to do that, especially when he came to talk about the drive. And I was expecting to hear really specifics about how to drive, how to have a Olympic gold medalist drive. And so he just got out there on the dock, and he didn't get in the single. He just sort of stood at the end of the dock and he just said, well, the drive starts with your feet and it ends with your hands. Okay, that was it. So wonderful. But it's true. He said, the energy, it's going to start at your feet and it's going to show up in your hands. And that's it. And that little gem has, it was the first time I heard a coach talk about something, in a way that wasn't, hold your hand here, move your leg that way, but just this sort of big deal. And I mean, whatever, that was 34 years ago. And every day I go up to coach and think, all right, just got to go start down low and end up in your fingers. And that's the basis. So there you go. I'm done.
Okay. Thanks, Dan. Next, we're going to hear from our fleet manager and the producer of these webinars all summer, Erika Sloan. And since the topic of fleet manager is on the floor, because that's where I put it, I want to mention that the original fleet manager, it was Marlene's idea, and I think Marlene may have been the first, but the longest tenured fleet manager was Peppa. And I came up with an analogy after watching Peppa my first couple of years of coaching. A lot of people say that what made Wayne Gretzky such a great hockey player wasn't his skills with skates and sticks, but rather that he saw the ice better than anybody else ever saw the ice. He just seemed to know everything that was going on everywhere on the ice when he was there. And I kind of thought the same thing about Peppa as fleet manager. There could be 100 things going on at the waterfront and out on the lower lake, and Peppa would know all 100 of them and be able to point to the 3 trouble spots and say, here, go there, you go there, and you go to, you do this. And when I became fleet manager myself, I tried to emulate that as best I could, and I was never quite as good at it as Peppa was, and I don't think it's likely that no fleet manager ever will be. But Point being, long-winded way of saying the fleet manager sees the program in a holistic way that nobody else sees the program. And as coaches, we get in our narrow silos and the fleet manager is watching us and thinking, why is he doing that? Does he not realize that he's interfering with all 6 of the other coaches right now? So in much the same way that I think everybody ought to have to wait tables before they can actually pick up a check at a restaurant, everybody ought to have to be the fleet manager for a while before they get to coach, but it doesn't really work that way. So coaches, we're on notice. The fleet manager knows more than you do. Anyway, Erika, take it away.
Thank you, Troy. I can confirm when I have coached weeks of camp, my perspective is so much narrower than the weeks that I fleet manage. And it's so odd. I'll realize on like Tuesday or Wednesday that I don't have nearly the scope of the camp that I do when I'm fleet managing. So I agree with that point. I would like to kind of back up everything everybody's been saying, and particularly what Troy kind of opened with, which is that I feel like I've been incredibly lucky over the past 3 years to have gotten what is possibly the best coaching education available, because I've been working at every camp at Craftsbury for the past 3 summers and have just been able to learn from all of these incredible coaches. And it's kind of funny, this title of the talk was the best thing I've learned at Craftsbury. And it was really hard for me to think of what is the best thing that I've learned at Craftsbury, because at this point it is very difficult for me to separate things I've learned at Craftsbury from things I knew before I came to Craftsbury. I think it's sort of the 3 years of my rowing career that I've had at Craftsbury versus the 9 years before. Like the body that I've learned in those 3 years is just so overwhelming that it's like what Marlene said, when the more you learn, the less you feel like you know. I kind of came here after 8 years of scholastic rowing and then a year of coaching, and came here and thought that I knew a fair amount about rowing, and just learned that there was bucket loads that I had never encountered before. So it's very difficult for me to say, okay, what is the one thing, the best thing that I've learned? But one thing that I think has really stuck with me in my own coaching and in my own rowing, that I sort of really have internalized since being here and learning from all these coaches. So in a specific technical sense, it's like rowing to my own effective length, or coaching people to row to their own effective length. As a 5'2.5" person, I've always kind of been one of the shortest people around in the sport. And, every rower thinks, okay, length, I've got to be as long as possible. And I've learned to just strike the word reach from my vocabulary, not necessarily from my rowing. I'm still working on that. But just thinking about how to move the boat in a way that is the most suited to my body and my own effective length. And the thing that's so valuable about being at Craftsbury and being in the single is that you don't have to worry about matching up with anybody else's stroke, and you can just row your own stroke and figure out how you best move the boat. So I think that's the best thing I've learned technically. And I owe that to all the coaches you've heard from, and particularly Troy, who I had the privilege of being coached by in college, as well as working with now for the past 3 years here. But in a more general sense, like a more, holistic sense, the best thing that I've learned at Craftsbury actually kind of started when I came here as an intern. So like Helen, I was an intern here while I was in college, and it was going into my senior year of college. So at that point, I was kind of staring down the barrel of, okay, I rowed for 4 years in high school, I rowed for 4 years in college, or 3 years, and I have this 1 year left. And this is it. This is the end of my rowing career. I have 1 year of competitive rowing left, and then it's all over. And so I was, not super excited about it, I was sad about that. And then I came to Craftsbury and I met tons of masters scullers, and in particular competitive masters women. And I had just never really been exposed to the idea that there was competitive masters rowers in the country. And so those couple weeks when I was an intern, I was so delighted to learn that there was this future for me with competitive rowing the older I got. And it's not changed. That impression hasn't changed at all in the 3 years that I've been fleet manager, and I've met every camper that's come through. And there's so many incredible people of incredibly advanced age who come through, and they're still very dedicated scullers. And when I say very advanced age, I'm talking about people in their late 80s who've come and they, they row every session, and they're delighted to be out on the water. And just the idea that I could still have that ahead of me is delightful. And it's not just the competitive side of things. It's the idea that there are people who aren't competitive at all, or they don't enjoy racing, but they still love to get out there. And that rowing doesn't just have to be about going fast, and it can be about enjoying it and just like the love of the motion and the sport and being on the water. And so I just feel incredibly lucky to have been exposed to people of all ages who've come through Craftsbury. And I think it sort of ties into the mission. One of the facets of the mission of the Craftsbury Outdoor Center is to support and promote excellence and participation in lifelong sport. And I think the excellence part is important, but so is the participation part. And just the concept of like lifelong sport, rowing truly is, and I really learned that here at Craftsbury. So yeah.
All right, thanks, Erika. I think I got a message from Maura in the chat. She wasn't sure she was going to be able to make it, but Maura, if you're here, you're next.
I am here. Hello. So it's hard to follow on everyone's footsteps there, but I agree with so much of what people are saying. I learned to scull in college. The boatman at my university would let me come in. He'd put me in a boat. He'd say, come back dry. I learned to row on the sea conch, so you really didn't want to flip at that time. And then my first sculling coach was Alvin Moser, and he was fantastic, but it was still a sort of a singular experience. So when I got to coach at Craftsbury, thanks to Marlene for hiring me, that exposure to all those coaches and like Michelle Africa and Pat and Ellen, Kevin, so many, just really broadened my experience. I'd been coaching for a while by then, but suddenly it was like a treasure trove of all sorts of experiences and ways to learn. And early stories with Marlene, at that point we had some people come for a camp who were, the woman had been losing her sight, and her partner was losing his hearing. And so rowing with them really changed my view of how you think about being in a boat. Before that, I'd been fairly technical, and through them, I was much more intuitive. It's like listening to the boat, that whole boat comfort. It was just a big change about thinking mentally about what you could do in a boat. And I know our time is running up down, so I will end with another short story. A couple summers ago, I happened to get a group. We were at the end of the lake, and I think some of the coaches are familiar with this drill I have about comfort in the boat, which is close your eyes, stick out your tongue, row with your pinky and your index finger, and take out your feet. So I had a whole group of people do this. I had 6 or 7 people in the advanced group, and they looked at me like I was an idiot. And I'm like, try it. Well, you could do it. And they had a great time. So I learned a lot from how they thought about it, because one turned out to be a very accomplished ballet dancer. Another one was a lawyer at a high level firm. Someone else was a physicist, and listening to how they thought about that and how they interpreted it was really gave me a lot of feedback. So in short, just learning from coaches and the campers has been profound, not only for my coaching experience, but also the way I row. So that's what I got.
Okay, thank you, Maura. We're gonna let our longest tenured coach wrap this up, but not before I heckle him a little bit. He goes by many names, like Lamont Cranston, the Shadow. He has the power to cloud men's minds. Dr. Parnassus, Coach Coachy. My first introduction to Ricci in the flesh, I saw he was at lunch the day that I started coaching at Craftsbury. And I arrived there and introduced myself, and it was a beautiful day. The water was mill pond calm, and I wanted to go sculling, but I had come up from Texas, so I didn't bring a boat with me. I needed a boat to go sculling in, and I knew he was going to be the head coach that week, and I said, Rick, can you put me in a boat? And he said, no. And I was a little bit taken aback. I was like, Okay, why not? And he says, I can't authorize that. Peppa has to authorize that. And at the time, I thought, what the heck, man? You guys hired me to coach and I can't go sculling? But he was just following the chain of command. And as anyone who's ever crossed Peppa knows, that's probably not something you want to do. And speaking of Peppa, later that week, I came in just a tiny bit later than expected from the silent row early in the morning before the first outing, and barely got my boat off the dock before the dock talk started. And I wandered up to the middle bay and went to the back bench, and Peppa was standing there talking to Kevin and or maybe Pat Guelakis, and she was ready to wither me with a stern look, and she said, Troy, you think this is training camp for coaches? And I didn't know what to say to that, so I just said no, and sheepishly slunk away. But that was a memorable week, made largely so by Rick and Peppa. And so, Rick, take us out of here. We're a little bit over an hour, and we'll finish right on time.
Okay, Troy, thank you. So it's all been said, and I was listening and just getting an incredibly warm feeling about all the years I spent at Craftsbury, and was feeling really emotional about how much I miss it. So I was thinking about what to say, and I think the coaches have said so much that I won't even try to embellish that. What I do think, if I want to tell a short story, when I first worked here in 1982, and I met Russell and Janet and Russ and Abigail, and Russell was the spokesman for the family. I think the family supported his vision. And when I make introductions to the Sculling group, I always talk about a little bit about the history. But as you may or may not know, Russell's vision for the center was a marriage made in heaven. And I made some notes about Russell. First of all, Russell wasn't a sculler. He went to Yale. He didn't row at Yale, graduated from Yale in 1950. He wasn't a sculler. He wasn't a rower. And I think Russell he was very smart about not betraying his feelings about the sport. But Russell was very much concerned with not promoting the elitism of rowing, or what he thought might be the reputation of rowing, or in this case, sculling. He was really the egalitarian when it came to making sculling available to everyone. But he was wise in regard to how he related to all the different people that came to the center. And so, as you know, the story goes that Russell reached out to Norm, and Norm Graffin reached out to Jimmy Joy, and Jimmy Joy took up the idea. Russell built upon it, and the rest is history. So when I started sculling in 1982, Russell was very warm and supportive of my interest in the sport. And so now let's move the clock forward to 1986. Ted Bonanno has left. Steve Wagner is the director. The sculling program got a big lift in 1984 with the television coverage from Lake Casitas. And so now there's three major gurus involved in the sculling program: Jimmy Joy, Jim Barker, and Al Rosenberg. And so to promote the center, there was an idea of, at this time, making a video, an instructional video, which was Sculling Part 2, and a promotional video VHS tape at the time, Sculling Part 1, the Craftsbury Sculling Experience. You can still get it. I have some hard copies of it. But anyway, that whole thing was very interesting to watch. I was then a very new coach to the sport, and I was in the background, and it was interesting to watch, to see how this content was going to be presented, because each of those coaches had his own vision of the sport. And Russell very wisely resisted making it about any particular vision. And he was very good about that and very insistent. And I think that was a stroke of genius on his part, because even though he wasn't a sculler, he understood from his skiing experience and coaching experience and teaching experience that if Craftsbury was going to be the place that he envisioned, it was really, really important to keep it as an open forum. And so that videotape was constructed in such a way that all three coaches were given the limelight, the stage, so they could promote their own particular ideas. And he was really, really amazing about how he dealt with those very strong egos. And so I personally feel that was a seminal moment in the development of Craftsbury. Janet, his wife, who was a silent partner, so to speak, Abigail and Russ. And I think that was really seminal in terms of where the Sculling program is today. Steve Wagner, I think, needs to get a lot of credit for all the years that he put into the center to build it up to what it became. And his sense of humor was outstanding. And he made Sculling a lot of fun when we had terrible boats, a really crummy boathouse, and the food was good one day, and next day when Russell hired a new cook, it didn't get so good. And Steve was able to carry that along. And so I think he really needs a lot of credit. So today I wanted to wrap this up by giving credit to those people. And then also where we are in the present. Dick and Judy, I remember them coaching when their kids were babies, and they would come for a week and they would camp out up by the boathouse, and they would have a week. And then we had guest coaches at the time, and Dick and Judy were the guest coaches. And then, as we know, they're taking the center to a nonprofit status and opening the future to what I consider to be a really bright and exciting place, a think tank, a forum, a place to develop coaches, a place to have fun, to enjoy the outdoors, to enjoy the sport, as Jimmy Joy would say, the art of sculling. So I just wanted to end tonight with just the acknowledgement of those seminal people in the sport and all the people that have come after them. And they're an inspiration to me. And sometimes when I'm feeling like, well, I don't really agree with what Troy says, and I don't know about this idea from Kevin, but then I step back and I go, what would Russell say? And Russell would say, what's most important is that people are enjoying the sport, enjoying the beauty, and there's room for everyone. So I think that's really what I can bring to this conversation. And I really appreciate everybody's insights. They've been wonderful. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Rick. Well ended, and we have our outro music at the ready. Erika, if you want to cue that up. It's hard to end this thing, but let's do it.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. This music was given to us by people who had viewed the webinars, Marisol and Chris Kuborn, and they made it. So thanks to them very much. And without more rambling.
Take care, all. See you next summer.